All right. Well, I'm really excited to introduce you to Angela Foster. Welcome.
Thank you, Zora. I'm excited to be here.
So, all right, I sent you some of the questions in advance, but I've added one other one because I really thought let's hear your backstory first on how you got into health and performance coaching after practicing as a lawyer.
Yeah, I guess, an unusual route, but maybe not so much with the women that I meet now who often are leaving right corporate careers to focus on health and wellness, coaching or different practices themselves. So I was a corporate lawyer for many years, which, as you know, is pretty full on. It involves a lot of weekends of work, a lot of all nighters, successive all nighters. So all of the things that you and I talk about, Zora, we completely disregarded. So we would just carry on working with no sleep, having food brought in to meetings and things like that. And to be honest, it was fine in my 20s because I think you just get away with a lot of stuff in your 20s, don't you? And
Yeah.
you're pretty resilient, you're pretty healthy, right? I'm sure there's things that are going on, right? And there definitely were for me from a hormonal perspective, which we can talk about if you want to, that were early warning signs. But I pretty much worked hard and played hard. And that was the lawyer ethos, right? So we would do both and we were burning the candle at both ends. But I would also work out, I would cycle into work. I lived in London, work out in the gym before work, And so I think it was trending really. I was probably overstressing my system at that point. But then, I was going for partnership and also thinking about starting a family at the same time. So I was like, okay, these are two kind of big, crazy goals. I want to have a baby and I want to become a partner. Which one of those is going to come part first? I'll go for both. And then I made partnership when I was 8 months pregnant. And then I was 3 months pregnant when I was due to go back to work after my year's maternity leave. So it all kind of happened very, very quickly.
Wow.
And again, that was also linked to some hormonal issues that I'd had, fertility things that I needed to think about. But ultimately, I ended up having three children in the space of 4.5 years, and they weren't easy pregnancies. That was also three sets of morning sickness, which turned out to be all day, all pregnancy sickness in the third time. And then, three cesarean sections, three babies with reflux. And I struggled with postnatal depression, which I didn't expect because I'm pretty upbeat, happy, positive person and very driven. And I think probably a lot of that is on the background of the stress and that tending towards burnout that I'd experienced. But then things did get bad. And the third time that I had it, it kind of moved on into a diagnosis of major depressive disorder. And I was struggling with my mental health, really, really struggling. And so I was seeing quite a few different psychologists that I'd had, psychotherapist for treatment. I was on a lot of medication. And then eventually I was put on antipsychotic medication to control for bipolar episodes. And at this point, Zora, I was like, I just don't want to go on. Like, I don't want to go on with this. My mental health has become such a struggle. I feel like I'm the person that shouldn't be here. Like, what if my kid, and I know it sounds crazy when I say these words now, but I felt like, would my husband and children be happier without me? Like, I feel like the weak link. And that's such a horrible place. And I was beating myself up as thinking I was a really bad mother and all these things that, now I reflect on and think that wasn't true at all. I was just a, mom with three under four and just really struggling. But that was how I saw it then. And so it eventually took its toll on my immune system. But I was sort of trapped in this. I guess I'd created a prison in my own mind. That's the way I look at it, because I was like, I want out, but I don't know the way out because I don't want my kids to grow up being those kids that, their mum took their life. I just didn't want that for them. But I just couldn't kind of bring myself into balance and find any clarity. And so it took a toll on my immune system. I got flu, which then developed into pneumonia. And then I had an x-ray and they called me up and said, you've got to come to the hospital urgently. We've seen this stuff on your x-ray. And I was sitting in the doctor's office and he was saying to me, showing me different things. And he kept talking about my lymph glands. And I remember thinking, I just feel so ill. They'd been trying repeated antibiotics and couldn't get rid of it. So I knew I had pneumonia, but they were trying initially to treat it at home. And then, he kept talking about my lymph glands. And I was like, why do you keep talking about those? Like, is there something that I don't know about going on here? Because it feels like maybe you're talking about lung cancer or something like this. To which he replied, well, we can't tell without a CT scan. So I was then rushed straight for a CT scan. And I was thinking, what's going to happen? And I remember walking back into his office, and before I sat down, he said to me, "It's worse than I thought." And those words, I was like, well, what is it? What is it? Like, do I have lung cancer? And it turned out that it was viral and bacterial pneumonia that had kind of just become really entrenched, spread across both my lungs. It was causing this ground glass presentation, but with very enlarged lymph glands. So they then took bloods. They found out that I was neutropenic. So I
What's
was
that?
hooked up. It's when it often happens with people actually that are having chemotherapy. So their white blood cell count goes so low that they're now what's known as neutropenic. So it's very difficult to fight off any infection, which
Mm.
is why, and a patient who's having chemotherapy, quite often, if they get something like tonsillitis, they can be hospitalized, right? Because they don't have that immunity. And so I'd reached that point. So I was admitted. And what I found out later was that he had sort of 48 hours before they were going to put me into intensive care, and they were monitoring me, but I didn't know that because he thought they would have to intubate me. Fortunately for me, they didn't. But it's amazing because, and I know you and I both talk about this and the kind of spiritual side of health and biohacking. But when I was in the hospital, I was faced with this reality of, actually, I might not get through this. What happens? And I remember looking at my phone, looking at photos of my kids, and just having this deep, heartfelt connection and thinking, like, what am I doing? It was like a waking up experience. They need
It
a mother.
sounds
Like, I've
it's
got to be there.
it sounds like a spontaneous remission that Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about all the time. Do you
Yeah.
follow him? Yeah,
I do,
it's
and just how he talks about, right, how your cells and your thoughts, like, communicate and signal your genes in new ways. And you know what's so crazy is that is exactly what happened, because I looked at them and I was like, I've got to get out. I've got to be their mummy. I've got to get out of here, and I've got to get well. And so I decided I'm going to figure this out. Like, I'm going to sort out my physical health, which was hopefully going to be a process, right? But a trodden path. And I've got to figure out my mental health. I've got to get back on track. But this overwhelming sense of love and commitment, really, to be there for them and my husband, who was my soulmate, met him at uni. And then within 48 hours of me making that decision, my blood work changed. So my white blood cell count started to come back up. It's crazy.
It's amazing. I mean, I interrupted you too early because I did hear this story on your podcast before, and that's why I said sudden spontaneous remission. That's incredible, the results, and it's that feeling of love. And this is what Dr. Joe Dispenza is always trying to mimic or create through his meditations, but it's hard to force. It's like you said, "Oh, I made that decision," like as if you didn't think about that before or you didn't want to get better. It sounds like it's something that it's almost hard to force create. It just happened, right? You looked at your phone
Just
and you said,
happened.
"This is the decision I'm going to make," and nothing stopped you, but it's that feeling of love or something. You started to trigger those hormones, those healing hormones, and turned off the cortisol and turned off all the inflammation. It's insane.
It's amazing, right? That just how that happens. And I was looking actually just the other day at some of the studies that Dr. Joe Dispenza's now done, where he's talking about chakra alignment, and they use these scientists who come in and measure, like, the light energy that's emitted from the body and the chakras. And initially they're out of alignment, and then they do these chakra alignment meditations. And 3 days later they come in, and it literally affects their energetic biofield that they can measure around the body. And I don't know if you've come across Dr. Patrick Porter, the founder of BrainTap. I did
Uh-huh.
a great podcast with him, and he said to me, the amount of light that you would have been emitting at that point when you had that creates that spontaneous healing. And it was so incredible because the consultant later, when he said to me, I really thought we were going to have to intubate you. I thought it was that bad because when they'd called me to the hospital, it was at a private hospital. And he said to me, I'm transferring you to the general hospital. I'm calling an ambulance. Like, I don't know how you're walking, but I have seen this go downhill so fast from where you are. And I begged him and I said, please don't move me. Well, at first, this sounds crazy. The first thing I said to him is, I'm going to go pick up my kids from school and get a bag and my clothes, and I'll come back. And he was
Yeah.
like, I don't think you understand. You cannot leave this. Actually, I'm going to transfer you because I don't know how this is going. And I don't think in a private hospital we have the full facilities. And so I begged him and said, I didn't know how bad. So I begged him and said, I can't sleep at home. I have young children. I'm so sleep deprived. I want to be in a nice environment in a general hospital on a ward. I don't think I'm going to sleep. Please just let me sleep. And he said, I'll give you 2 days and we'll see what happens. And that was when this, like, I saw it, right? They did my bloods and then 2 days later they've changed and I never had to be transferred. When I went for the checkup with him, they redid the CT scan to look and he was like, I can't believe it. Like I did end up with asthma induced, uh, what do they call it? Infection induced asthma, but they think maybe I had undiagnosed asthma before. But apart from that, in the very deep layers of the lungs, the alveoli, there was a little bit of damage. For the most part, it just healed and he just couldn't believe it. So it
And
was
is
crazy.
this what triggered your journey into health and biohacking and just going,
Yes.
what in the world did I just do to myself and how can I help others have it? Is I'm guessing. I don't know.
Well, do you know, I actually don't think at that point that I was that well developed on it. I think now I would think that, but at the time I was like, oh my God, I've been given a second chance. I've got to get well for my kids. What does this mean? Like, how do I do this? And I'd never heard of Dr. Joe Dispenza at that point. I had
Mhm.
not been into spirituality really. I'd read books by the Dalai Lama, things like that, but I had a very strict Catholic upbringing. So I'd sort of gravitated away from it. So, but I had sort of been exploring Buddhism and things like that. And so then I decided, right, I've got to get well. So I went on this journey of what does it mean to be truly healthy? And that's when I found a functional medicine practitioner, looked at my gut health. I started retraining. I found Dr. Joe Dispenza's book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And I was like, yes, yes, that's what I have to do. I've got to break the habit of being me, this depressed person.
Yes.
And so, yeah, and the whole like subconscious mind and programming, and I worked on that with therapy. And then it took me actually quite a while because that was 2014. And then it was not until the end of 2019 that I transitioned off all antidepressant and antipsychotic medication. So it was a
Oh, well
journey.
done. It's a
But yeah.
journey. And so how were you working this whole time through when you were in the hospital or did you have to stop working?
No, yeah. So I initially took a break from work and then I decided not to go back. And so then when I was getting my health on track, at first I was like, I just want to get healthy for my family and for me. And then as I started to do that, and I then decided I would retrain, I started working with people and I realized just how many women are under pressure, right? Trying to juggle family life, career life, and these things. And that's when I decided, right, I'm just going to completely switch paths. And then in 2019, I started the podcast. And that again, literally just began as me thinking, why don't I start a podcast and I can interview some cool people and really learn from them? You know, I didn't start it as a business. And then it just kind of grew from there. And we've been super lucky with the guests and everything we've had,
Yeah,
and the
that's
people it's
amazing.
impacted. So, yeah.
Oh, what a story. What a story. It's such a story of inspiration and hope. And I would love to learn a bit more about what the women that you've been helping now. So you've gotten through your journey, you've learned so much, and now you're able to help so many other women. You've got this biosyncing program, you have your website, you've got so much. Tell me a little bit about the average age of the women that you're helping here, and what are some of the most common health challenges that you see them facing? And then how do you help them overcome of that so that they can still be, I don't know, they can still do it all? Because I imagine you're attracting the woman who's a high performer, who's a high achiever, who's a certain type, no?
Yes, yeah, I think that's probably fair. I mean, I think that, do you know what? I think it's interesting because before I guess answer that question, I'm often asked, and the podcast is obviously high performance health. And that was really me bringing the two worlds together. Because when I gave up law and I had to get my health on track, and I will come back to your question, this might just frame it a bit, is that, you know, it was like, okay, now I've got really, really healthy. And previously I was really high performer, right? And all these things. So now how can I bring those two worlds together? And what I then found was if you truly want high performance, then you need to be really healthy if you want high performance over the long term. So I realized actually this is it. So one of the things I often get asked is, and some people will say to me, but Angela, I don't think I'm a high performer. And I'm like, really? I think you probably are, because I think if you're listening to the stuff that I put out, that other podcasters like yourself put out, then I believe you're living with intention. And I think for me, high performance is about living with intention. It's an intentional life, right? So if you're living like thinking about how can I be healthier? How can I have an more empowering mindset? How can I be a better mother? How can I be a better leader? All these things. That to me is the definition of high performance, because you're living with intention. And ultimately, that's what I did to get myself back on track. The women that I work with are women who definitely want to live a more intentional life. But, I think that the women I have in my community and things, they're from all different jobs. But the women that I guess I work with more personally in my program in biosyncing, they tend to be, to answer your question, between sort of 38 and 48. That tends to be around the age they are. And they're going through those. Sometimes they're a little bit older. And we do have outliers. We have women who much older and younger, as always. But I would say the majority of the women I work with are around 38 to 52. And they have, I think the way that I like to frame perimenopause is this is such an ideal time to really revisit everything you're doing in your life and decide what you want life to look like in the next half, if you like. And I think it's such an empowering time. And yes, I'm also in perimenopause. It's like the messy middle. So how can we navigate that with more grace and ease and come out of it where we want to at the end? So a lot of the women that I work with are in their sort of 10-year span. And they're trying to juggle often a career with their children and sometimes aging parents as well, which just adds another dimension.
It's this sandwich generation, if you know what that is. In
Yes.
gerontology, we learned about, yeah, it's women in that, late 40s, early 50s, where we may still have kids at home, maybe not little kids, but we also have aging parents. And then the pressure that has on the woman. And believe me, we did not talk about menopause other than maybe 20 minutes in our gerontology program. I couldn't believe it. But they were saying, if you add on, this is this is what I'm bringing to the table, is you add on all the perimenopause fluctuations, and it's hard to handle. It's hard to deal with. So with the lack of hormones, you're just less resilient. It's harder to get these things. Like you said, it was a lot of things you can do when you're in your 20s. Your allostatic load, that bucket that we have that gets full as we get age, it's pretty low when you're in your 20s. And then by the time we get into our 40s, 50s, it's overloaded. And then this is where we can burn out, or the bucket spills over. So your audience is prime for perimenopause. Like, they're really, really going through it. So what do you think is the biggest complaint that they're having? Like, is it just general, they're not healthy, or they're overweight, or they're hot flashes, or they just want to know how they can still do the job, deal with the kids, and then get energy back? What's the biggest complaint that they're having?
A few of those that you've mentioned, I would say definitely energy, right? And just having that the resiliency that you're talking about. So in our program, we do a lot of work looking at heart rate variability and sleep and biofeedback training, because we know that's a really non-invasive method of a mechanism, right? Of seeing how is their capacity and their resilience and their adaptability stacking up. They actually have data that they can work with to see. And I think it is, as you say, it's that loss of resilience. And it's very hard to distinguish exactly how much of that is due to hormones and how much is just due to the pressure of life, because we definitely were more resilient in our 20s. But then in my 20s, I didn't have three kids and lost my father 2 years ago and have my mum who sadly now has dementia. I wasn't in that position in my 20s. So you kind of think, if I look at my own life, how would that be? And what would the 20-year-old me do? I know that there's a loss of resiliency with hormones and things, but how can we bring that back? And I do think, and I had a great conversation about this with Dr. Sarah Gottfried on the podcast, looking at, is it possible for women to get through perimenopause and beyond without any hormone therapy? And her answer, because she also seeing so much less resiliency in her practice. And her answer was yes, if you did everything right. So if you were to eat really well, you slept really well, you lifted weights, you did some aerobic exercise, you did your stress management practices, you meditated, you got fresh air, natural light, all these things. But the reality is that woman in her 40s, she's trying to do those things, but they're not, can't be a regular every single day. And sometimes your sleep is disrupted. Do you know what I mean? And you have got a really stressful thing going on at work, and there's just no way around it. So you need that resiliency to cope with it. And I think I think that's the thing. So how can we improve that capacity? And we can do that. Biosyncing is the method that I've developed. There's lots of methods that people can use that can really help to up level those areas of their life, so that they just have better support for
Mhm.
everything that they're doing.
I like that you bring in the biohacking component and you bring them data, because sometimes we need to see some measurements. I think especially, I think maybe perhaps even more so with your audience and these people who are maybe working with statistics or with analytics, and they like to see numbers. And it's not that we should be just relying on the data. I think what we and I are trying to do is help people dial in and be intuitive, but sometimes it's hard. And then those numbers or just seeing a little bit of data helps go, oh yeah, you know what? I really think, yeah, that's true. It kind of confirms some things. And then eventually you can get off of any data or tech or devices and things like that. So it's interesting also that in that Sarah Gottfried talks about how important it is to have the proper diet and lifestyle, of course, but it's so true how many people are spot on. It's really, really hard. And if I sometimes I think if you even if you were, you're probably orthorexic because you're just doing it all. You're gonna burn
Yeah,
out trying to
true.
be too healthy, right? And so having the hormones, I mean, I'm a big fan of bioidentical hormones, but I also don't think it's just that. I think we really got to do our best to get all of as much as we can in terms of getting the hormones for our support. But that once you have the support, it's so much easier to get to the gym or to eat broccoli or the signals are there, get to sleep, or you're sleeping finally, and so you get the energy back. So how many women in your community are actually on bioidentical hormones or just are any hormones at all? And how many of them are just saying, I don't quite need them yet?
I think it's hard to say exact percentages. I would say more are taking hormone therapy than are not, right? I think that there are still some women who feel they don't need it, right? I think most of them are, and they realize that it's a helpful adjunct. But I think even with hormone therapy, it's also about finding the right balance, right? And that's not a quick fix. It's not like you call your doctor one day and say, I think I need hormones. They run some tests and they go, here you go. And now you're like, yay, feel amazing. Sometimes that happens. It doesn't happen every single time, right? And it needs adjusting. And I think that's why, as you were saying, we can't ignore the lifestyle practices. I sort of talk about it. I have this protocol called shift that I think is just a super easy way for people to remember, because it's like, how do I make the shift? You need to look at your sleep, as you mentioned. You need to look at your hormones and your heart rate variability. You need to gather insights, right? Some of that is mindset work through journaling. Others is through lab work. It might be through wearables and things like that, but that's like the centerpiece. And checking in with yourself, like you were saying, and becoming intuitive is as big a part of that. And then the F is like, how do I fuel my body in the right way? And for that, I use an acronym FLOW, because it's not just food, right? It's food, light, it's oxygen. So the way you breathe, and water, the way you hydrate, and you have all those minerals. And then the final piece is the T. How do I train my body and my mind? That was the bit I fell down on. I was busy training my body when I suffered with burnout and depression, but I wasn't training my mind. And I think that's really important. And just connecting with yourself and who you are. And I think it might be Carl Jung. I forget who talks about this, but almost dividing your life into thirds, right? Where the first third of your life, you're very experimental, you're in high achievement mode, you're trying lots of new things. And I don't think we want to lose that between 30 and 60, because I think too often, right, we feel less courageous about making brave decisions and taking risks. I think we still want to embody that. But I do think that between 30 and 60, it's a time of our lives where we should really get to know ourselves and who we are, because that really sets the frame for those later years, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's just like a really important part as well. So that T is really about looking at the mind connection as much as anything else. And how can you use as well, often your physiology to change your mindset? Often we think, "Oh, it's just the power of thought." Actually, moving our body is a really good way to change that as well. And so if you think about shift, you can kind of assess yourself. And I think you were playing around with the quiz we have, right?
Mhm.
Where it'll just give you scores on each area, like how are you doing on shift? And that's something you can go back and do again, and people can like take, because then they can reassess themselves, and it will shift itself, right? Because sometimes, like we were saying, you're going to be really well slept, and other times you're just not, for whatever reason.
You're right. I will have the link to that in the show notes because that was a really fun quiz to take. You can find it on your website quite easily, and then you'd give some really cool tips. So the burnout, let's go a little bit into the burnout because this is something you're really quite well known for and because you had your own struggles as well. So in the UK, you're a lawyer in the UK working full time, and I'm wondering, have you ever noticed anyone else around you struggling as well with the burnout, or did you feel like the only one?
No, I think it was really prevalent, and I think, quite scarily so. I mean, I remember when I was a junior lawyer, one of the women that I worked with, she was a few years ahead of me, and she was going for partnership, and she at the firm, and she was working for the managing partner in this was in the corporate department, and she was also working for another senior partner, and she was running these multinational deals, which is what I was doing. You know, they were cross time zones. One of the big ones I remember doing at the time was merging compact computers with Hewlett Packard. Right, it was a huge deal. And so that's why you're up all night. But I remember, you know, in one of the firms that I worked at, someone basically saying, I can't do this. I just can't run all these things at the same time. And that was the quote unquote partnership track, right? That's what you needed to do to get there. And she was told that she needed to do it. That was what she had to do. And then she just didn't ever return to work. She had a nervous breakdown. And I think that's the reality. I think it can get that bad. You know, I don't know what that's like now. I think we have embraced wellness so much more. And I know that, you know, I work with not so much law firms, but with large financial institutions or multidisciplinary organizations, and they are putting in, you know, I'll often go in and speak on how can we be healthy for high performance. So they've actually introduced this concept of high performance health within the workplace, because I think we kind of moved before into this like work, 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 hustle, grind. And then we went through a process of like, let's all embrace well-being. But they didn't seem to really gel together, right? They're almost two ends of the spectrum. And that's why I think really it's like, actually, how can we introduce high performance health? How can we be so healthy that we're performing at the highest level? And it's so much more sustainable, you know, and it's driven towards that state of high performance, which is where I tend to speak. And I definitely see organizations embracing that now.
When I was living in Hong Kong, this was, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago or so, I was doing corporate talks. Somebody connected to me just because I was doing health coaching at the time, and they really wanted me to talk about stress and health and how to eat well as well. But I was so pleased. I was like, this is amazing because in Hong Kong, as you know, very high stress. It was World Bank that I was working for, you know, some of these big financial firms. And I would just go in there and say, give them some tips, but it shows that it was at the top of their agenda. I mean, I could have talked about anything. And so really, it's really good that I think corporations are now paying attention to the health of their employees because they will probably work better. And I'm sure there's a lot of research on that as well. But there is some interesting research that it's a very popular study that came out. I think the Mayo Clinic did it, and they said that they estimated that, let's talk about menopause a little bit in the workplace, because this burnout, sometimes it doesn't always happen around menopause, right? But perimenopause, menopause is a time where just the load gets really, really heavy. And so they said in the US, menopause can cost women an estimated $1.8 billion in lost working time per year. I always have that number burned in my head, 1.8. And some people, they just take time off. Others, they quit altogether, like you mentioned earlier. And then there's some other studies showing that 1 in 10 women who were employed during the menopause, they left work because of their symptoms. What are your thoughts about this and the prevalency and what you saw, and how can is this is got a US statistics, but do you think you're finding the same thing in the UK?
I think the statistics in the UK, yeah, are pretty high. I think, and sadly, I think a lot of women do end up leaving work around that time. Sometimes I think, and I see this in the women I'm working with, is that actually they've got to a point where they want to embrace a different lifestyle, right? So it's not necessarily always directly linked to menopause, but they're like, actually, now I've had a really great corporate career. and now I want to do something different. So I think there is an element of that, but often that is motivated by the fact that they have experienced high levels of stress themselves, and they actually want to go back into these organizations and help the younger women that are coming up cope better, right? And I think it's difficult because it's such a shame, because when you look at the experience that a woman has by her late 40s and how much she has to offer an organization, she's really in her prime in that sense, right? And if you were just to support her for a few years, I mean, I think we need to support better overall in terms of that stress and capacity. But if you look at just the menopausal transition, if you support a woman just like we do in pregnancy and maternity leave, if we were to really support that and help her through it, she's going to be like, so, I mean, Dr. Lisa Mosconi's done this work, right? The way the brain develops and that we actually get an upgrade. It's going to be so amazing later on in terms of, and her ability to be an empathetic leader, you know, as well, and really understand and pass on the skills that she has. So I think we do need to approach it differently. I definitely do see a lot of women leaving. A lot of the women that I see are excited to start something new, a new venture. And it is difficult to distinguish how much of that is menopause and how much is that is, you know what, I've done my 20 years in corporate and actually now I want to do something that's giving back to people.
Mhm. It's really important. I think we do take care of women in the workplace or support them with their new venture, because when we think about it, and this is we in gerontology we focus a lot on older adults, and then we also look at their caretakers. So if you're looking at the woman who's in their 40s and 50s taking care of aging parents, and then she needs to take time off of work because you got to take the parents to the hospital, and then or maybe eventually quit, and this is where that 1.8 billion dollars is lost, is because not only is she losing the income, but she's also losing putting it back into the system and getting it back in you know when she's retired. And then on top of it, she's also paid a lot less too, and you know there's so many things that have to come, you know, for a woman who's really trying to make money, trying to be financially independent, and yet forced because society, quote unquote, tries, you know, says that it's the female that needs to go and take care of the parents or whatever. It's not always the case, but most of the time, it's usually she needs to quit the job or she needs to take care of the parents, and I really think this needs to shift.
Mhm. I
But
think
I want to get into. I sent you this question earlier, and it's like it's something I want to discuss with you because I find it interesting. There's this website called equalityhumanrights.com, and it's a campaign that menopause can be classified as a disability in some situations, and they say that employers have to accommodate the woman who is struggling with her symptoms and just not discriminate her. They they may even create menopause discussion groups. If you go to the website, you'll see there's all inclusive menopause societies policies, and then there's menopause leave and flexible work hours, et cetera. So I can probably see where this is coming from in the US. But then there's something that I found with the NHS, just in the UK, or, you know, they say that, oh, maybe in the workplace, we should have women wearing uniforms if you're having a hot flash, or just move them over to a cooler part of the office, or ask for a fan, use technology to, you know, for example, set up reminders on the phone and help them take notes with brain fog. This is all on their website. What do you think about these work policies for women going through menopause?
I mean, I like the fact that they're trying to do something, right? I like that. And I think the intentions behind it seem honorable. I think where I struggle is that most women want to feel empowered. And I don't think that if I was experiencing hot flashes, putting me in a different outfit and giving me a fan and moving me and advertising would be an empowering move for me. Do you know what I mean? I think if you actually gave me some, you know, access to a medical doctor, to maybe a nutritionist, because I think, you know, actually a lot of women don't have their nutrition dialed in as well to support their changing hormones, their gut microbiome, someone that maybe could help with the insomnia that she might be experiencing and help with those symptoms as well, and really give that wraparound support. To me, that would be a more empowering solution to a woman than
Calling it a
advertising it and
disability.
moving her. And yeah, and I don't get the the disability aspect of it. This is something that has always happened. I think one of the organizations I was working with, one of the female leaders there said that, she had a man saying, oh, it's really good that we're doing everything about menopause. This is really positive. How many women actually go through menopause?
Uh-huh.
All of them? Like,
If they're lucky.
if you're lucky, if you live that long, right?
Yeah.
But that's sort of surprising. That's the level of education that has been. I know it's got so much better in the last 4 years, but it is a very normal thing. And I think that I like to frame it in a positive way, right? And I
Yeah.
think as women, we're pretty resilient overall. We know that I definitely had pregnancy brain when I was pregnant. I had to write things down or I was going to forget about them. I would prefer it if we could show women, well, actually, how can we help your brain? And what are the things that you could put in that would improve it in addition to hormone therapy, right? So we know, for example, creatine monohydrate, one of the most studied supplements ever, with really good research to help make up for sleep deficits. It doesn't just help with our muscle mass, which is a whole other conversation, right? Which is really important, and strength and power and things like that. But it also helps with brain health. And I see noticeable differences when women take a small amount of creatine, for example, right? That would be better. We know that if you have omega-3 fatty acids, right? And Dr. Rachel Gow did a very good study in children, just looking at their processing speed between the children that were deficient in omega-3 and those who were replete. And what she found was that the children who had enough oily fish in their diet, they could listen to what the teacher had said, the question that was being asked, think about the question, and have their hand up ready to give an answer, while the people who were depleted were still figuring out, what did the teacher say? And
Mhm.
so even things like that, education for women of understanding what are the nutrients that are important, those are just two examples. What about the fact that we often need more zinc, right, which helps to calm inflammation? Maybe she's having really, really heavy bleeding, because this is another common thing, right, for women. And they don't know what color can they wear white, or are they going to have this kind of flooding experience, really embarrassing? What about the fact that they may be depleted in iron? And if you're low in iron, that precipitates more heavy bleeding. Like, how can we educate them and get them the right support with supplementation and things like that, and the right hormone therapy? From my perspective, I sound very excited about. I think that would be a better solution than giving them a fan and a different uniform and a new space in the office. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I found that it's like, okay, we got to discuss this. The other thing I struggle a little bit with is the menopause leave, or that's actually in Spain. There's a region here that gives PMS leave. It's if you're having really bad PMS, and they'll pay you. You'll get time off because your cramps are so bad or whatever. And so when I think about this menopause leave, and I wonder from an employer perspective, well, is that disempowering us? Because they may go, oh, okay, I don't want to hire a woman in her 40s and 50s because then I'm going to have to give her menopause leave. And I struggle with this balance of, yes, we need to make our voice heard. Yes, we need to hear about menopause. Yes, we need to talk about it. And yes, we need to help these women. But I don't want it to get to the point where it sounds like we're disabled and we're like incapable and of being part of society. And then, balance that out with just being completely ignored too. So what do you think? And it would be going through an employer's point of view if we have this menopause leave.
I mean, I think it concerns me from the same perspective as you, right? And I think that we're seeing it across the board. So there's a kind of greenwashing thing that's going on as well in the advertising world. So, like, now you can go and buy menopause chocolate. I mean, like, what is that?
What's what's that with the
I mean, we all
HRT
love
in there?
chocolate, full stop, right? We're a woman. Of course we love chocolate. But I don't think we need menopause chocolate that has ashwagandha or something in it. It's going to be like micro amounts. I don't think that's going to stop the hot flushes and, suddenly make me feel so much better. And it feels like we're being taken a little bit advantage of. Do you know what I mean? Because
Yes,
do
there's
we need
sharks
menopause
out
chocolate?
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that whole thing just concerns me. And I think even when you were talking about there about women with PMS, I think any system, first of all, regardless of what it is always open to abuse if you have it. But I think most women would never abuse that, right? There'll always be a small category. Any system will have that. I think what more is important is that the woman who really struggles with debilitating PMS and needs to go to bed because her cramps are so bad, bless her, needs medical support or functional medicine support to help her resolve the issues that are leading to those cramps being so bad, not a day off a month or 2 days off. Because guess what? When she goes back in the office, if she's in any kind of leadership role, that work hasn't gone away. And she's probably not in bed at home. She's trying to log on, taking painkillers, trying to figure out how to deal with it all. And it's just unnecessary pressure. Do you know what I mean? I think
Mhm.
I would prefer if we gave solutions to help women and support them. Than to provide kind of, I guess, fixes that really aren't fixes, right? They're kind of like band-aids, if you like, because I've been there. I had endometriosis, I had PCOS, when I was saying earlier, I had hormonal issues, and they're really difficult to cope with, really difficult. And I don't
Mhm.
think that giving me days off for endometriosis would have been the answer. I think actually helping me get that endometriosis under control into the degree that I could would have been a much better solution. Do you know what I mean? And lowering that inflammation and helping me manage my blood glucose so that my PCOS wasn't as prevalent, those would be really, really positive steps. And in my experience, I don't know about you, Zora, but I find that women really genuinely want to take those steps to be well. They want to feel empowered.
Absolutely. Yeah, but we got to get root causes, solutions rather than just put the Band-Aid on it. What is the one thing a woman in menopause, I mean, sorry, there's one other question that I wanted to ask you before that one. It's because we are on this workspace. If there's a woman who's working right now full time, she's got the kids, she needs her income, but she needs a break. What can she do right now? Like, if there's one little piece of advice that you could give her to find more of that work-life balance and get her health sorted.
In terms of a big thing or a small thing?
Anything, yeah, just what can she do? Yeah, she's like, I hear you, I gotta take care of my health, but I really need to I can't quit my job. I can't take time off. I've got still kids or let's say aging parents that I have to deal with, and she's on the verge of burnout. What do you think she should be doing?
So I think there's a lot of things in terms of taking care of herself, but I can tell you something very simple that we see in the data from our own program members that makes a difference. So, for example, if we're looking at heart rate variability, and what we will do is put a chest strap on to have a look. And by the way, for people listening who don't know what heart rate variability is, it's the interbeat variability, right, between heartbeats. And so the RR interval is what it's known as. And generally speaking, a higher variability. So the higher the variability between heartbeats, the better capacity and adaptability you have. You're more resilient. And when it's lower and the heart tries to come more into order, because the heart isn't designed to beat like a metronome. If it's an average of 60 beats a minute, we're not going to see one beat every single minute, every single second, sorry. So the heart, when it recognizes disorder, will now try to create order. So your heart rate variability drops. So when we put monitors on and take a 3-day assessment or a 5-day assessment, what we can see is how much is that woman under stress and how much is she in sympathetic drive. And not all stress is bad. So I would always ask people to think about, a good question is, am I stressed? Which can create adaptations and make you better. And that's how we get results, as long as it's matched with recovery. Or am I stressed or am I stressed out? Because am I stressed out is very, very different. So even when we see a sympathetic drive, it's not all bad. But what we do see is that then is mirrored at night. So we find that they're not getting into those deep states of recovery during the night. And so an easy thing that any woman listening to this can do is actually to access that parasympathetic nervous system through the breath. And if you do that in just micro amounts during the day, we have literally seen how it transforms your recovery and rest at night. And so, if I could show you on a graph and prove it to you, be like, wow, I can't believe that 1 or 2 minutes, regularly throughout the day could make such a dramatic difference to my sleep and also to how I feel and my capacity in any given moment, right? Because we always want to find that space between the stimulus and the response. And when we feel overwhelmed, that space just narrows, right? It feels like I'm just reaction mode all the time. And it's through that slowing down and slowing the breathing down. Because one thing I see on a lot of women I work with is their breathing rate. If I look at something like their aura is really high. So they're breathing rapidly, and that tells me they're under stress. So how can we just engage that parasympathetic activity by slowing down the breath at certain times of the day? And sometimes it would be like, I know a lot of the women I work with are like me. They want to get up, they exercise early, and I love it and it motivates me for the day. But before you rush out of the gym into doing your kids' breakfast and the school run and then commuting and getting to work and being and in the whole doing mode, just rebalance your nervous system before you leave. Do a few minutes of slow cycling with deep breathing, or, do sit down and do some box breathing or lie in Savasana for a few minutes. Just like every time you put out, just rebalance and bring back in. So there's like a really nice energetic flow. That would be the first place that I would start.
I love that you said breath work. I'm a huge fan. I did the training with the Oxygen Advantage, which is functional breathing.
Ah, with Patrick McEwen.
I loved,
Love
yeah, it was
him.
the best program. I teach the women in our community as well, and it's such a powerful tool. It is absolutely, you're right. If there's one thing, it's free. You can do it right now. It takes just a few minutes, and it's so, so powerful. But I love that you brought in the research as well. And Patrick McEwen, he's just half his book is all citations and
Yeah,
research.
he's amazing. I love that you teach that in your membership as well. It's just amazing. Yeah.
It's useful. It's such a useful tool. You just and it's hard to believe that we don't know how to breathe, or that we are over breathers. That yes, we can overbreathe. I
Yeah.
know I have to let you go, but so we only have a few more minutes left. So let's kind of rapid fire top 3 tips for a woman in midlife who is dealing with a high stress job and feeling the weight of anxiety, maybe even depression. We got the breath work. I think we're going to make that number one. Do you have 2 other tips?
Yeah, I do 100%. So I would say one of the things that I get all my clients, program members to do is to do something I call cap off your day. It makes such a massive difference, right? If people listening to this can start doing it. And so the daily cap is number one, you celebrate your wins for the day. It doesn't matter how big, how small, whether you just got to take your coffee outside, you got 5 minutes, whatever it is, you had a story or a hug with your child, doesn't matter, right? It could be big or small. Celebrate the wins and celebrate the lessons, because it's the lessons that you have that are helping you constantly evolve into and have that growth into that future version of you. The A is appreciate. We know that gratitude is the magnifier of all things, right? In terms of like attracting the things you want in your life, in terms of helping you sleep better, feel better, boosting mood. So, what can you appreciate about your life? We quite often do that around the table at dinner, and we go through and everyone contributes. I also like to do this whole daily cap. I do it in bed at night, right? I just go through, because I think it's Dr. Tara Swart who talks about something known as the Tetris effect, where the last thing you think about at night is the thing that you'll kind of ruminate on over at night, and that will inform your next morning. So you want to have a really positive frame. And then the P is prioritize. Like, what are my top 1 to 3 priorities? Jim Collins talks about this. If you have more than 3 priorities, you don't have any. So, like, narrow it down, and that will help you make sense of your tomorrow, right? So, it's like cap, celebrate, appreciate, prioritize. That would be the second thing that I would say, in addition to the breath work. And then I would say, just wherever you can, get some time just for you, just snatching moments, either for you on your own or with a friend, right? And do something. It doesn't really matter what it is, just something that you absolutely love. It could be a nature walk. It could be you go play a game of tennis. It could be you just phone a friend if you don't have a lot of time, but just have something that creates joy in your life, because we can only give what we have, right? And I think as women, we're trying to give all the time, but we're never replenishing ourselves. So, and then as we were saying a moment ago, focus on that breathing, bring yourself into balance, because it is all about you. It should be about you, because you are like such a primary person in so many people's lives. And so you need to take care of you and make yourself the focus for your life. So those would be my top 3.
Oh, I love it. I think the overarching theme today is balance. Bring balance in your life. Thank you so much, Angela. I have show notes where people can find you. You got a fabulous podcast that I'm binge listening to right now. It's called High
that you're
Performance.
coming on to as well. I'm excited.
Yay!
I can't wait to have you on.
Yay. Yes, it will be fabulous, even more fabulous. High Performance Health. I'll have a link for that. Go and get the free health check and personalized report that's also on Angela's website. It's on, yourtotalhealthcheck.com, right? That's something
Yes,
you
it is.
sent
Yeah,
me, yeah?
yourtotalhealthcheck.com.
And then the website, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, I have links to all that. It's either Angela Foster or Angela Foster Performance. Now, before I let you go, Angela, do you have any last words for a woman going through the menopause transition?
I would say if you're having a hard time of it, I just think that my favorite words are, this too shall pass. It will, right? Just love yourself as much as you can in the process. If you look at the happiness curve of men and women, you're at your lowest happiness point in your mid to late 40s and just before menopause. It's a real thing. But guess what? The trend is only up after that. So good times are coming. And yeah, just focus on you, self-love, and everything we've been talking about. And thank you so much, Zora. Thank you for having me here today.
Thanks for coming. Have a wonderful day.